Please welcome Ben Abdy-Collins.
We can learn a lot from funerals. We face death. But when we face death, it's a time for me to deal with things. The surveys tell us that the second or third most feared thing is death. And the first most feared thing is public speaking. But when it comes to a funeral, that's what I do. I write services and I deliver funerals because I'm a funeral celebrant. Now, we can learn a lot from the process that I go through and what a funeral does and what a funeral has to achieve. So there is a process there that I'd like to explore with you and then show you what you can do and learn about for your business and life as a result of going through that. So, as a celebrant, my role is to create a unique service for an individual who has died, to support a family who are facing death of a loved one, and they need to be able to say that goodbye, and it needs to represent the person that they love and care for. Now, to achieve that, there is a series of things that I go through. I go and meet the family. I spend 1 to 3 hours with the family discussing the individual. And from that, I'm able to build a service. Now, a service consists of, like most stories, because it is a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there are elements within that. Those elements are, how does the coffin arrive in the chapel? Is it carried in by family? Was it carried in by the funeral director's bearers? How is the coffin dressed? What special ways is it going to be treated? Are there candles? What are the stories being told? What are the hymns? What are the music? What are the flowers going to do? How will we enter the chapel? Because entering the chapel, actually, there's multiple ways of being able to do that. First of all, it could be the coffin goes in first and everyone else follows. It could be that the congregation goes in first and then the coffin goes in, followed by the family. There are many other options. Do we have candles? What are the elements of religion that we're going to include, or are they going to be not involved? If it's a cremation chapel, do we leave the curtains open after the committal, or do we close the curtains? I always thought it was one way, but it seems to be 50-50 between families. So there are lots and lots and lots of different ways in which we can do these things. But these elements that make up the service are only found by going through 3 things. Number 1, listening and really engaging with the family. Number 2, paying attention to what they're telling me, because that way I get to know their needs. And number 3, the details, and the details. Because it's through having the details I know how to put in those elements to create the rituals, that create the ceremony, that create the goodbye that the family is able to have for their loved one. And this is where it gets very rich. This is where the beauty gets to happen. Now, the process can be all hammered through and all agreed, because the information that I've got is written into a script. The script is then checked by the family. But ultimately, the decisions are made by the executor. The executor has the final word, because that's the person who's been selected by the person who has died to make the decisions for them at their service. Now, sometimes in families you get lots of arguments going on, but the executor, who actually pays the FD, who pays me, or FD is the funeral director, who pays me, gets the final say. So it's a really interesting process. It's simple and yet complicated, like many aspects of business. Now, there are 2 golden rules with funerals. Be on time and don't drop the box. It does happen. And the coffins don't always fit in the graves, but that's also another story. Probably the best thing to do is to tell you about how these elements are put together and how they make a difference by telling you stories about different funerals that I've delivered. So funeral number 10. I'm at the funeral home. I'm meeting with a couple of gentlemen. They've just lost their mother, who was 92. So they need to obviously sort out her service. The funeral arranger says to me, Ben, can you come and talk to a family? There are 6 people in the room. They are the children of a 62-year-old who has died suddenly. And they want a service that became known as the John Wayne funeral. I turned up at the chapel dressed in these boots, jeans, checked shirt, waistcoat, kerchief, and yes, I did have a cowboy hat. The man was really into John Wayne funerals. Films, not funerals. Oops. And so we entered the chapel to True Grit, and the boys were wearing cowboy shirts and boots. The girls were all in spurs stripped, so the funeral crew thought they'd been had when they thought it was a themed funeral, because they were dressed as cowboys when they turned up to pick up the family. So there was a large uh-oh. But it was one of those days where they got the goodbye that they needed. Now this is a tip for you, they put mementos in the coffin. So long as the memento doesn't go bang, there are stories there, you can put things in the coffin. You can put in messages. You can put in... he had an empty tin of beer in his coffin because he was a heavy drinker. That was one of the reasons why he was in the coffin, but that's another story. But it was these details that gave it to the family. It gave the family that opportunity to do what they needed to do to say their goodbyes. Another family asked me to look after 2 parents that had died 6 days apart. Now, the details that we had there were her coffin had pink bows. His coffin had blue bows. We knew who was who, because the coffins were the same package. I was dressed very similarly to this, except I had green shoes on, because the family wanted something that was celebratory. They didn't want a dark, somber funeral. And many people are choosing that more often. This is my standard jacket that I wear for funerals, typically with this as part of a suit. But it's that opportunity for people not to see black all the time, because the funeral directors are all dressed in black. The funeral crew are dressed in black. It's mourning trousers. It is very somber. And a lot of people are choosing celebrations, and celebrations are about colour. Sometimes I walk in and the chapel is full of pinks and blues and yellows, turquoise. It's bright, it's vital, it's alive, because it's a celebration. And that, to me, is a much nicer way of being able to do things. Now, with the double service that I did for this husband and wife, the curtains were left open so that the children and the family could say goodbye. Lots of people like to touch the coffin when they leave. Lots of people like to lay flowers as they leave. Lots of people actually sometimes like to kiss the coffin, and lots of people like to go nowhere near the coffin and get out as fast as they possibly can, because people still think, because there is death, it might be contagious. Because we have this, seems to be this fear that death is dangerous. But go back 50, 60 years, the coffin was on the dining room table. And in some parts of the States, because I don't know what happened in England, I just know this from a funeral director in the US, they used to do the embalming in the kitchen, which means that they would exsanguinate, clear the blood out the body over the kitchen sink, and then fill it up with formaldehyde. So if it was that much of a problem, I think we'd have slightly less ancestors than we've currently got, if you know what I mean. So there are lots of different aspects to all of this, and there's lots of things that we can learn about. I have a baby funeral on Monday, and that's going to be a tough one for the family. But I must just emphasize the 3 things. If you get the details right, because you've engaged, because you have listened, you'll have done your job. And that's what I will be doing on Monday. Thank you.